Hello again. My name is William. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Again, you can call me Willie, William, anything like that. Um, Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 6. As I've said before, I'm attempting to teach every chapter of the Bible. There is a lot of them. It may take a long time. Today we're going to look at Genesis 6, like I said. If you're wondering what the hats are, I have a huge hat collection in my house. This is the most comfortable place for me to film. I probably will do most of my filming here, but as you've seen from other videos, I've been all over my house. So again, I want to shout out to Lucas for helping me in the fifth video. He is not here today to help me, but he will be doing some other ones with me from time to time. And so again, if you, like I said before, make sure you pause this at some point and read the chapter. Maybe you've already read it. If you have, just continue on. So today we're going to look at Genesis chapter 6. It is a little controversial chapter, and I'll explain why. I'm going to break it down like I normally do in little sections and then explain what's going on here. Okay, so let's begin. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. When man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. He shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children with them. They were the mighty men, who were the men of old, the men of renown. Okay, so if you begin with looking at the first 5 verses of this chapter, or first 4 verses of this chapter, you see there's three people groups, or three, I would say, 3 ideas, or 3, and I don't know what the word you use, but people groups, or, well, anyway, so you see the first thing is the sons of God. You see daughters of men, and you see this strange word that you only see in the Bible a few times, which is translated the Nephilim. And there are a lot of interesting translations to this. Some people believe that the sons of God are actually demons that come down to earth and mate with women. And they get this idea from Job chapter 1, when it says Satan went into God's presence and the sons of God went with him, indicating that the sons of God were demons. Well, the problem with that is there's mention in the New Testament, sons of God are those who follow Christ as their Savior, like me and others. So to say that for sure that these are demons doesn't make sense. But the idea is that they also say that these descendants are actually the Nephilim. Well, we'll see in the next part of this is the Nephilim. Well, I mean, in that section that we just did, the Nephilim, it just says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. It does not say anywhere in the context of the passage that the sons of God had, that the descendants of the sons of God were the Nephilim. It doesn't say that. It says that the descendants of the Son of God were, in fact, the men of renown, which is another thing we'll talk about in a few minutes. I personally believe that the sons of God are not referring to demons that came to earth. If you look at Israel's history as we move on, or if you've studied the Bible on your own, you'd see that one of Israel's biggest downfalls over the years is that they will, the men would go after women from other nations, ungodly nations, just like the women would also go after men of ungodly nations, and they would pursue them, marry them, and then they would bring their idols into their kingdom, or into their homes, and eventually they would trade the worship of God, Yahweh, for the worship of gods that don't exist, and it would corrupt the nations. And if we understand the context of what's going on here, in chapter 6, it says, in the very beginning of this again, it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. So it's saying that the population is growing. This is also, if you remember from the timeline thing I showed you last time, this is about 1,600 years, give or take a few hundred, from the creation. It's probably closer to 1,300 to 1,400 years when this begins. Actually, it's actually about 480. I think in my head, it's about 1,520 years since the creation when this begins, and so it's saying that the daughters of men were attractive. So what the idea of this is that, what I take to this idea is the sons of God are actually the descendants of Seth. They're godly descendants who are following. The sons of God are descendants of Seth who are following God. They're followers of God. And they looked at the daughters of men, who are probably most likely descendants of Cain. Do you remember from chapter 4, Cain killed his brother Abel. And the daughters of Cain were probably ungodly because Cain's descendants probably ultimately became ungodly. So the idea here would be the same thing that happened that I mentioned in Israel's history. The godly people would mate with the ungodly people or have children with them, and through that they would give up the worship of Yahweh, the worship of the Christian Bible, the Christian God of the Bible, and worship gods that don't exist, or false gods like Baal and Balaam and other gods that we will look at some point in the future. But then it says, God says, "My spirit shall not abide with man forever. He is flesh. He shall be 120 years." Now, a lot of people think this 120 years literally means that man will only live to be 120 years, where that doesn't actually make sense, because if you know from today's culture, we're lucky. People are blessed enough to live 80, maybe 90 years if they're that blessed, but typically very few people live to even be over 100, and if they are over 100, it ain't many. I don't know of anybody who lives to be 120. So what does this 120 mean? Well, and the next generation, even after this, where Abraham lives to be about 180, 190 years old. And so what does this 120 mean? Well, I actually think it means that it took Noah 120 years to build the ark. And this is how long God gave man to repent. Because we'll see in the next thing that there's no one on earth who's righteous except for Noah. And God says to Noah, "I'll give you 120 years to build it." He actually didn't tell Noah that, but it took Noah about that long to build it. At least that's the way I interpret this. But then it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Well, the Nephilim are demons. Most time, I think most people translate them. It's like I said, it's not a word that you find in the scriptures very often, but it is typically, from what I've seen and what I've studied, it is a demon. And the idea is that the Nephilim were on the earth, and what they were probably doing, which, if you're familiar with the powers of Satan and demons, what they do is they go and try and incite people to do things. Just like we saw in the Garden of Eden, where Satan talked to Adam and Eve about eating from the tree that they were not supposed to. One of the demons probably went to Cain in chapter 4. Now, it doesn't say it in the text, but it's a good indication that probably was true, and told him to kill his brother. And we see this all over, in our own lives, where Satan will constantly, or his demons will try and get us to do things that are contrary to God's word. When we need to trust God and trust his word and not trust Satan and what he says. And so the idea here is that Satan most likely went to the descendants of Seth and said, look at the descendants of Cain. Aren't they attractive? They're more attractive than your people. And chances are, because they were ungodly nations, they probably dressed a little bit less modest than a typical follower of God would do. So it just seemed like they were more attractive, when in reality they probably weren't any more attractive. It just seemed like they were because they showed more skin, which drew them in. So then after this time, over so many generations, they became corrupt. So the actual beginning of Genesis chapter 6 could have been a few hundred years before this, and then the time frame between that and we get to Noah is probably a couple hundred years, and now they've basically fallen, and then we get to Noah. I know that may sound confusing, a little confusing. So, well, I'll get more into that when I get to the end. And then it talks about that these were the mighty men, the men of renown. Well, the men of renown doesn't necessarily mean they were half demon and half human, like some people would interpret, but just means they were, they basically had no, by the time it got to the point of Noah, no one was following God anymore. And it was basically just, they were just, had no purpose in life. They just lived and died, where Noah was the only righteous man on earth. Now you get to verse 5, it says, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every inclination of their thoughts were evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man from whom I created from the face of the earth, man and animals, and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So this part is basically saying that God looked across the earth. So again, the idea here is that at some point, men and women, they just got corrupt, and everything they did was sinful. They didn't follow the ways of God, and then God found favor in Noah. So Noah was the only righteous man on earth. And God said, well, I'm going to, well, it doesn't say here, but it's going to go in the next part, but God was sad or grieved that he made man. And he was contemplating destroying all of mankind. Now, we're not really going to get into this today, but one thing we'll talk about a lot is God doesn't change his mind. God doesn't change what he's doing. He never changes his mind, because if he changes his mind, does that mean his first thing he made or first decision he made is not as good as the second decision? Or is the second decision not as good as the first? No, God is perfect, and everything he does is perfect. When God says he's thinking about blotting them out, he's just saying that because God will say that, but he wasn't going to actually blot them out. Now, you may disagree with that, and that's fine. And if you do, you can comment or say something about it. But again, he says but Noah, he found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, it says, These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I've determined to make an end to all flesh. So, God is very upset that everybody is sinning. Nobody's following God. The only person that's actually following God is Noah. And God says to Noah, I'm determined to make an end to all flesh. So destroy everything. For the earth is filled with, this is verse, the end of verse 13. For the earth is filled with violence through them, behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and outside with pitch. This is how you will make it the length. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark is 300 cubits. Its breadth was 50 cubits. Its height was 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood upon the waters. I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wives, your wife, and your wife's sons with you. So let's stop there. So he says to Noah, I'm going to save you, but destroy the rest of the world. So he begins by telling Noah to build an ark. And in this ark, he wants him to fill, and he gives him the dimensions of this ark. Okay, I don't know if you know what the word cubit means. A lot of people don't understand what a cubit is. A cubit is actually a standard Hebrew cubit. Well, any cubit is actually from your middle finger to your elbow. And based on the Hebrew cubit, which I can't remember what that is, but that would be a cubit from finger to toe, because they didn't, fingertip to elbow, since they didn't have measure or tape measures or rulers or things like that. They would have to use other forms of measurements, and that was the measurement they would use. So he told them to build it by 30 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, okay? And he said to layer inside and outside with pitch. Well, pitch is basically a form of like a sealant of the day. It was like a sap, and it could cover the outside so that there would be no leaks when they were in the water. In verse 19, and every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and all the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come in to you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God had commanded him. So, God tells him to take 2 of every kind of animal, and we talked about kind in chapter 2 and chapter 1. It doesn't mean that he had to take 2 of every type of dog, because there would have been other types of dogs at this time, but he would just take 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 horses, 2 brontosauruses. Yes, I said brontosauruses, 2 pterodactyls. Dinosaurs would have still been alive on the earth in those days, and yes, he would have brought them on the boat. Now here's the thing, which we can get into a little bit more about the next chapter. Noah is 480 when he begins building this boat. He's 600, which is also where you get the 120 years that I mentioned earlier. It's 600 years old when he actually enters the ark. He is actually pretty smart by this time. But not only is he smart, but God is the one actually bringing the animals to him. And in I'm going to ask a question at the end, and then you can answer it. Noah would have been smart enough, and God would have brought babies. He would not have brought an adult animals. He would bring puppies and kittens. And, the smaller they are, because the reason you bring smaller is because you want them to live longer after they leave the ark. That way they can produce more offspring. They also eat less. They sleep more. They take up less room. They don't fall over and get hurt like older people do. Like me personally, I fall over, I can't get back up. The older you get, you break more bones. It makes sense to take the younger ones. So they have found dinosaur bones that are actually basically this small, and you can actually fit, if it's a baby dinosaur, you could fit it into the ark, and would have no problem fitting it in. And again, you don't have to take 2 of every species of animal. You take 2 of every kind of animal, and so it'd be easy to fit. But we find out later it's not actually 2. He's just saying they go in 2 at a time. So the question I have for you for next week, and you can answer down below if you'd like, is how many of each animal did Moses take on the ark with him? That would be your question for this week. I'm thinking about just adding a question every week so that you can, from every video. So again, some people may not agree with my interpretation of the beginning of this, of the Nephilim and the sons of God and the daughters of men, but it's more logical, at least from my perspective, that the sons of God are actually descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men are descendants of Cain. And they did have children, but they are not the Nephilim. The Nephilim are demons who helped cause the daughters of, or the sons of Seth to be attracted to the daughters of men. Thanks again for watching. That is the end of this video. If you have any questions, of course, leave them if you would like. And I will see you the next time I have a video. Thank you.